everyone. On behalf of MIT SOG, I'm truly delighted to introduce Advocate Rama Sarode, one of the eminent lawyers on the occasion of International Women's Day. Advocate Rama Sarode has an experience of more than 20 years in the field of women and child rights. She is working as an external member for more than 15 organizations for POSH, that is Prevention of Sexual Harassment, and she is a certified trainer for NLP, that is Neuro-Linguistic Program. Along with being felicitated with many awards and recognition, like Rotary Navadurga Award, National Gandhi Forum Award for Excellence in Social Work, and Science Award, etc. She has also been appointed on many advisory committees and has been called on various interviews on television and radio. She has authored a manual on domestic violence for lawyers, and the same is implemented by Women and Child Affairs Department. Today, we are here to listen to her valuable insights on the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act and its contribution and significance in the political sphere. Before starting the discussion, I would like to wish every woman a very happy Women's Day on behalf of MIT and SOG. Good morning, ma'am. How are you doing?
Good morning, Jayee. I'm doing good. Thank you.
Yes. Shall we start with the discussion today?
Sure.
Yeah. India is the largest democracy in the world. At present, there are 2,868 political parties, among 7 which are national, 54 belonging to states, and remaining are local, some recognized, some unrecognized. The value and significance of an individual participation is colossal in political parties. However, when it comes to women's participation, the rate is pretty low. To combat gender inequality, the government of India has instituted reservations for seats for women in the parliament. It is a sad story that India ranks 20th from the bottom in terms of reservation of women in parliament. There are only four political parties that are governed by women. When a woman tries to break off the patriarchal norms and desires to enter politics, she faces various forms of violence, including bias, harassment, psychological, physical, and also casual sexism. One of the main barriers for women to be in politics is actual use of politics. Maybe Tamil Nadu's 5-time Chief Minister, Jayee Kotwal, who faced such humiliation, or the MJ Akbar case. Some stories heard, some unheard. All of them occurred at the workplace. In 2013, India passed its first legislation on Prevention of Sexual Harassment and Workplace Act for Women, which was enforced with an intention to combat and address the concern of sexual harassment of women at workplace. Ma'am, we would like to know about the Act, its significance, its applicability, and how the internal committee of the POSH addresses the concerns of the other.
Thank you, Jayee, for bringing that up. And I think it's very important. I mean, the whole premise of this law is that every working place has to be safe and healthy. Only when it is safe and healthy will we be able to bring in that culture where people will use their fullest potential and feel at ease and bring in all those positive energies to really put in their best efforts at workplace. And there's no reason why political parties should be excluded, because ultimately it is a working space, it is a working place for people who want to be in that political party. So like any other organization, like any other workplace, political parties have their office, political parties have volunteers, political parties have registered members, political parties have leaders who recognize them to be part of that party. And so it's a workplace for them, and hence this law should definitely apply to them. That's point number one. The whole idea behind getting this law was, we all know the famous Vishaka guidelines that we got in 1997 because of the struggles of Bhavri Devi. Though the Vishaka case itself was not, kind of limited to the issue that Bhavri Devi faced, or the gang rape that Bhavri Devi faced. But it was made, I mean, it was a more broad kind of a discussion to look at how to make workplace more safe for women. And we took the help of CEDAW, that is Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is an international convention, which came about in 1979, which India signed and ratified in 1983. So CEDAW mentions safe workplaces, and it talks about two things: quid pro quo situations and hostile environment. And that's where Justice J.S. Verma, who was the then Chief Justice of India and who was hearing the Vishaka case, formulated guidelines to ensure that workplaces are safe. And of course, there was a lot of struggle, a lot of advocacy happened, women's group fought, and finally there was a law passed in the parliament, which is called the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. So this is a gender-specific law. It protects women from being sexually harassed at workplace, and as the title of the law goes, it's not merely remedial in nature. It not just does not look at redressal. It also looks at preventive and prohibitive measures, and that's where I think the major role of the employer, or in political parties' case, the head of the political party, needs to take that kind of a responsibility, needs to build that kind of a culture where they follow the mandate of this law. And they do have committees, internal committees that have to be formed under this particular law to handle a case of sexual harassment.
Thank you for the insight, ma'am. Also, there have been news and reports where they say that Aam Aadmi Party or BJP or Indian National Congress have had their internal committees and they have implemented the internal committees. But all of it, when it comes to reports, they are not being seen. Everybody is dealing on their disciplinary committee. What is your take on that? Do the internal committee have that kind of value in political parties?
Well, I think it would be very interesting to probably, write to the respective district officers of all the districts where an annual report has to be submitted by every workplace who has an internal committee, to check if whether all these political parties have submitted the annual reports at all the district levels, because the annual report has to be submitted at a district level. But when I look at what is happening, especially, I mean, we are in Maharashtra, and Maharashtra is no exception, or if you look at elsewhere also, especially when the, elections are announced and there are a lot of campaigns happening. Look at the kind of derogatory language that gets used. Look at the way women are treated. Look at the way name calling, name shaming is happening. All this, I mean, should fall under, the definition of sexual harassment, because the definition of sexual harassment is any kind of an unwelcome act or behavior, which could be a physical contact or a physical advance. It could be using of sexual colored remark. It could be a quid pro quo situation, that is asking for a sexual favor. It could be showing pornography. It could be, using any kind of a verbal, non-verbal or physical gestural, kind of behavior that has a sexual context to it. So an hostile environment where there's preferential treatment, there is a threat to a present or a future work, or where there is interference in work, where there's a hostile environment created, or where there is a humiliating treatment likely to affect health and safety. And when I say health, it is not just physical health, right? It is mental health. So look at the kind of language that people from across political parties have been using, the humiliating language that is being used, some double meaning language that is being used with sexual connotation to it. I have not heard any political party take any kind of action against people from their own party. I have not heard of any case really being, filed against such leaders. And I'm not surprised, because of the, look at the power balance, or rather imbalance in the power equation that happens. And political parties, we see so much of that imbalance in the power equations, because everybody is in that competitive mode to go up to that level where they can get probably a ticket and, get a chance or some position. And that itself is power, right? So I haven't really seen. So even if they have it, I think they are on paper. So in the literal sense, they would have it. In the spirit, do they have it, is a bigger question.
Absolutely right, ma'am. So you might say that politics was always the castle of men than women, because there were men beforehand in politics than what women participation is today. So Bharatiya Janata Party, that is BJP, has encouraged a lot of women participation. Maybe Smriti Irani, maybe Rama Sarode, time and again they have done it. They have implemented 30% of reservation for women in their own political party. Following that, the Indian National Congress has done so, and other parties have encouraged the same kind of reservation that is coming in the women's way, right? But it's in different circumstances and under different surveys that have been taken out, it has come to notice that some political parties, I may say, function without an internal committee, and on the other hand, some cases are directly dealt with the disciplinary committee. Sometimes the cases are not even reported. The fear of not reporting, instead of that, the fear of acknowledging that kind of report, or that kind of taboo to acknowledge that kind of report, that something of this sort is happening in your political party, is pretty grievous. And if you don't take notice of that, yes, definitely there is a lack, and there is a lacuna in that function of POSH Act, right? So what is your view about the internal committee, and after the change, what is the difference basically between Vishakha guidelines and the POSH Act that has been implemented? What change can you see from Vishakha guidelines to the internal committee right now? You have been there for 20 years. It's a long time.
Yeah. So I think the definition of sexual harassment is taken as is. Vishakha committee was also it was a gender specific guideline. So the law is also gender specific. Well, the definition of respondent in the law is gender neutral. So the harassment can happen from a man or it can happen from a woman. So respondent can be anybody under this particular law. There is an addition to how workplace has been defined in the law as compared to Vishakha guideline, where transportation is also added as workplace, especially if the transportation is provided by the organization. But I think the major part, that is a changing factor under the law is that the Vishakha committee did not have any kind of powers to really hear the matter. It was a committee that could decide whether it is a case of sexual harassment or not. And if it was a case of sexual harassment, the complainant could then approach the court. And we've seen a lot of times that the committee looked at a case with one perspective and the court looked at it with a completely different perspective, right? But here in the law, now the internal committee have been given the powers of the civil court. And we have judgments like the Delhi High Court some months ago said that, when it comes to choosing between an administrative decision as compared to a decision of the person being an IC member or a presiding officer of the internal committee, transfers cannot happen just because it's an administrative decision. They have the powers of the court, and so they are equivalent to judges. Just as judges have a term to finish in the court, so also the presiding officer must get that term to finish, especially when they are in the middle of a hearing and they're hearing a case. So I think the courts have been very open about how the internal committee has to function in spirit. Well, we do say all these political parties have internal committees, but I have not really seen them work towards women empowerment even within their parties. Yes, there is reservation. Has any party claimed that they have 33% women as per the reservation filled in? All the, kind of seats that are there for the women, 33% that have filled in. If that was the case, our ranking in the gender gap report would not have been that low. I mean, I don't remember the exact percentage of political participation of women, but our gender gap report is going down year by year. We are even lower than what we were in the last year. as compared to, so 2021 report, we are at, I think, 143 or something like that, and 123 or something like that. We were slightly higher up in 2020.
Then it again.
But when the graph is going down, that itself indicates the entire gap that is there, where women are not participating in political decisions. Women are not part, or are not in those positions where we can call them as decision makers in the political parties, and none of them have been able to fill up those 33% of reservation that we are talking about for women.
Absolutely, you're right. So that happens when it comes to the employees in the political party. What about the outsiders, who are the volunteers, who work for the cause of the political party, who work for the societal cause of the political party? They have massive number of volunteers who are part of that workforce, right? So how efficient would it be for a political party to acknowledge these rights of the volunteers who are coming from outside, being there for time being? For example, if they are coming for elections, they will be there for that time period itself. Later on, for 5 years or so, they will disappear. Next 5 years, they will come again as volunteers and start working. So what about their rights? Has the POSH Act, can the POSH Act be implemented for their rights as well?
See, the simple rule under this particular law is that, do you have a working relationship? And if you have a working relationship, this law will apply. So doesn't it apply to other organization? If somebody is interning in a corporate, are you for all purposes under this law having a working relationship with the other employees of the corporate? The answer to that is yes, right? Even if you're an intern, even if you are not paid, even if you're volunteering your time with an organization, isn't it a working relationship? It is a working relationship. So similarly, anybody who has a working relationship with the political party will fall under the purview of this law. That is the beauty of this law, that the definition of employee under this particular law is very broad. It could be somebody who's on a permanent payroll. It could be somebody who is on an ad hoc assignment. It could be somebody on a contractual basis, and you may not even know who the principal is and who the agent is. It may be somebody who's a volunteer. It may be somebody who's an intern. It may be somebody who's on a probation. So the crux of it is that you fall under the definition of an employee if you have a working relationship. Right? So anybody who volunteers that, oh, you have a campaign going in this particular state and I want to volunteer for this particular state, that is a working relationship. And they would be covered under this law. They would be protected under this law. So there would be women who are protected from this person, and this person will be protected from the others in the parties. That's the rule, because it's a working relation.
I think that's good that the law is including everybody in the ambit of the definition as the employee. As you said, that is the beauty of the law, right? So when it comes to these political parties and the social agendas that we work for are never separated. They cannot be separated. They are inseparable. Political parties work day and night for the welfare of the people. It includes women workforce too. So if a political party takes a stand against this sexual harassment and violence against women in politics as a whole, it would be a step forward, encouraging more women to join in politics, have and attain more leadership positions. And people and party need to recognize that political parties are workplaces, and implementation of the POSH Act is very, very necessary and essential. So what do you think that how can this awareness be generated, and how can this awareness be a major factor in case of political parties and politics?
So section 19 of the law is very clear. It talks about, the kind of responsibility that an employer has towards, their employees. So the internal committee, who are the members of the internal committee, must be known to everybody. So it must be boards about that should be put up at conspicuous places for people to see. there must be preventive measures taken. So it could be in the form of creating awareness, it could be in the form of trainings, it could be in the form of the messaging that happens. And I personally believe that any kind of messaging around sexual harassment at workplace should be non-threatening. So about policy being in place, so there are different ways in which those preventive and prohibitive measures can be taken, best practices can be followed. And especially if it is a top-down approach, that, leaders at the top set those kind of expectations, or leaders on the top follow this to the T. That's when that kind of a culture will percolate down. But if the leaders on the top feel that, oh, it's okay, ye to chalta hai, if they feel that, then obviously people below them will not follow. So I think it's about how aware are people on the top, who are the decision makers in the political parties. What is the political will that they have to implement this law? Do they just want this law on paper, or do they really want to work with this law in spirit? And if anybody of them who really wants to work in spirit, we are more than happy to help them comply under this law. We are more than happy to provide our services and create that awareness, and we are willing to give any kind of assistance that they need so that this law is implemented.
Absolutely. So this is what has happened, right? Since that Me Too movement, it came like a wave, it went like a wave. After a point of time, the importance, the significance of that Me Too movement slowed down, it demolished, it disappeared now. Today, if somebody goes and complains about a sexual harassment at workplace, it is looked at in a very casual manner than what it was looked at before, during the Me Too movement. Everybody was talking about the Me Too movement. So all these social movements that come as a wave, all these political parties that take it heads on, make it an agenda to talk about or to say something about, do you find it necessary that a woman, as a woman, has it been properly addressed or has it not been addressed? Because from my point of view, as a woman, I feel that it just diminishes the value of a certain agenda, diminishes after a point of time. It has no meaning when it has lost its cause. So what is your thought about that?
So I personally think that Me Too movement was a very urban movement, also restricted to women who had access to the social media, right? The issue of sexual harassment goes even deeper than that. And it is a fact that women do not speak about sexual harassment because it's still a taboo. More than 78% women don't speak about their experiences of sexual harassment, is a survey, right? So it was, I think Me Too movement was questioning the structures not being in place. It was questioning the systems that had to be in place and were not there. That was the whole thing. Also, there were some people who are venting out, or rather sharing their experiences of going through an act of sexual harassment, but didn't have the courage to raise it at that point of time for all, because of the imbalance in the power equation that was there between them and their perpetrator. So they didn't necessarily want to go and file a case, but they wanted to definitely voice it out. So we saw that a lot of it didn't result into cases. And for some of it that did result into cases, we saw what happened with the MJ Akbar case, right? I mean, the moment Priya Ramani talked about an act of sexual harassment, he went and filed a case of defamation against her. And ultimately, we know how long that case went on. And then finally, the Delhi High Court saying that a woman takes time to talk about it because it's not easy to talk about this.
Absolutely.
And again, in the court itself, you see the kind of power equation that was there, right? I mean, where Ramani went with one lawyer, MJ Akbar had 97 lawyers supporting him. And he was in a position to hire those kind of services, right? So look at the pressure that is created even when a case is going on. Now, if we don't want another Me Too movement to happen, then it's all about having those systems in place. It is all about following the mandate of the law in spirit. And if we are able to do that, then we don't need another Me Too movement. The entire Me Too movement was questioning that. And I think rightly so they did it. But I wouldn't say that that indicates the entire women community who probably would have faced sexual harassment. A lot of them still keep quiet about it because they are scared of repercussions. They're scared of retaliation. They cannot afford to lose their job. It supports them economically. They cannot afford to lose that. Right. And the major part is that they fear character assassination that comes very easily. I mean, you know, a woman's character can be assassinated very easily. So I think one of the things that we need to do when somebody says that, you know, oh, I was a victim of sexual violence, the moment somebody says that, I think we have a volley of questions for them. What were you doing at that time? How did it happen only to you? What kind of clothes were you wearing? What time did you leave at night? Why did you go out at that time? Whom did you go out with? Just remember that any kind of a violence is not okay. So instead of questioning the victim of why is it that you are victimized, question the perpetrator. What gave you the right to violate her right? The moment you change the narrative and the moment you change the burden and the onus of questioning the person who has done the wrong, I think that is when we will be able to bring some kind of an accountability and some kind of, support for people who take the courage to really talk about it. They speak up and they stand up for themselves. Let's support them.
Absolutely, ma'am. On this line of discussion, I get reminded of a poem by Mr. Upadhyay. Give me a moment. Yeah. Pushyamitra Upadhyay. He says that सुनो द्रौपदी शस्त्र उठा लो, अब गोविंद ना आएंगे. छोड़ो मेहंदी खड़ग संभालो, खुद ही अपनी चीर बचा लो. युद्ध बिछाए बैठे शकुनी, मस्तक सब बिक जाएंगे. सुनो द्रौपदी शस्त्र उठा लो, अब गोविंद ना आएंगे. कब तक आस लगाओगी तुम बिके हुए अखबारों से? कैसी रक्षा मांग रही हो इस दुशासन के दरबारों से? स्वयं जो लज्जाहीन पड़े हैं वो क्या लाज बचाएंगे? सुनो द्रौपदी शस्त्र उठा लो, अब गोविंद ना आएंगे. कल तक केवल अंधा राजा अब गूंगा बहरा भी है. होठ सील दिए है जनता के, कानों पर पहरा भी है. तुम ही कहो ये अश्रु तुम्हारे किसको क्या समझाएंगे? सुनो द्रौपदी शस्त्र उठा लो, अब गोविंद ना आएंगे, अब गोविंद ना आएंगे. Ma'am, this poem is absolutely true that you need to be empowered. A woman needs to be independent in protecting herself. A woman needs to stand behind another woman. There cannot be a man behind a woman who is always successful. A woman who stands behind a man is always successful. A woman behind a woman can also be successful one day, right? So it's time that we need to empower ourselves, not just for this day, not just for Women's Day, not for the cause of Women's Day, but every single day. It's very necessary for us to stand together and be there for each other. Thank you for your beautiful insights on Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, and it's been a pleasure, very, very much pleasure for me specifically to be a part of this discussion. Thank you so much for your valuable time, ma'am.
Thank you so much, MIT SOG, for having me here to discuss this topic, which is very close to my heart and I'm very passionate about. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.